sound of the beast. Whoop, whoop. That's the sound of the police. Whoop, whoop. That's the sound of the police. Whoop, whoop. That's the sound of the beast. Whoop, whoop. That's the sound of the police. Whoop, whoop. That's the sound of the police. Whoop, whoop. That's the sound of the beast.
I mean, I found the phenomenon of, police on campus to be really disturbing, particularly at a moment when there's so much attention being paid to diversifying the academy, diversity, equity, inclusion, creating pathways for success for students from underrepresented backgrounds. And I think often these things get framed very narrowly in terms of, getting Black and brown people in the door and into classrooms and graduating. But then when we actually think about what the conditions of possibility are for students who have been historically marginalized from the university to succeed, to do well, to feel a sense of community, these are also people these are students who often come from communities that have historically been targeted by police, that are subject to over surveillance by police in their home communities, and then experience the same things when they come to campus. I teach a class on policing and abolition for undergraduates, and so every time I teach the class, we have conversations about what is safety mean, what does it mean for you to feel safe on campus, what does it mean for you to feel safety as a student at UCSC. And I've never had a student answer that question by saying seeing UCPD on campus makes me feel safe. But there's been research on the fact that, at the moment when more and more students of color start to enter the academy, that's when we see the expansion of police on campus. And I think it's not a coincidence, it's very deliberate. So I think that having police on campus is actually anathema to the goals of, promoting equity and justice and building community. And there was a moment during the Wildcat strike, and I was with faculty, on the picket line every day. And there was one day when students were students and allies were blockading the entrance to campus peacefully, right? Just sitting in the intersection peacefully as a way of kind of maintaining the picket line. And they were brutally assaulted by police, right? And so, they were thrown to the ground, thrown into paddy wagons. One of, a student from my department suffered a really horrific head wound. I had students who were dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder and long-term health consequences just because they were sitting peacefully in an intersection. On top of that, the students who were arrested for peacefully protesting that day were then put through the academic conduct process at UCSC. So not only were they physically and psychologically harmed by their experience at the hands of police, but then they had to go through a whole sort of academic discipline process. And they were changed by that experience. Like I said, they suffered long-term health consequences, and then they were also doubly punished by the institution. That really just cemented, right, my distaste for the presence of police on campus. What we all witnessed was that the police were brutally crushing dissent.
About policing is a very complex thing on campus. I think as a person of color, I don't feel safe when I see police on campus. I worry about getting, some kind of persecution or detention for whatever reason, right? During the strike in the 2020, they were very aggressive against grad students striking for a better payment. I was very impressed by the level of persecution and how they were attacking grad students. So I think that was the closest. And another few times maybe in campus has been when I go for a run or something here on campus. Not necessarily talking to them, but maybe eye contact. And dude, I really feel I don't know, I feel scared. I don't feel safe with, especially if I am alone. I think it's what they represent, right? Like the power that they represent and what they can do for against you. So they are part of an institution, and the institution is trying to regulate something. So they kind of, for me, means like violence, violence that comes through the state, through the government, out from the government, and they're like being represented through these bodies, through these people. They are police of colors, I know that, but many of the police on campus are also white people. It doesn't mean like the people of color will be, like less aggressive or whatever, but I feel like there are a lot of like white police on campus, and that makes me feel like we target more, like most of the time, people of color. I even see sometimes like white kids or people feeling or doing crazy things on campus, and I feel, if these kids will be of color, I don't know that will be, the case.
And the policing, the over-policing that I'm familiar with is when I look outside that window and I step out to my little porch. And that's like gross over-policing, right? Everyone sees the police in a different way based off their experiences, and everyone has a different level of understanding and has space different treatment from them, right? So up on campus, like for example, I remember in the very first SUA meeting, very hot, contentious meeting, right? One of the students, if I could put you in contact too, his thing was, he stood up, public comments, he said, not all of us here are documented. Some of us are immigrants, and there we have the pigs outside. And that just shows us that this is not about the SUA, this is about race.
When it comes to thinking about having police presence on campus, and everything that I've lived or that I've encountered as an undocumented student, and my peers have also encountered, I would say having police on campus is not a good idea, because there's been a history of police throughout the country collaborating with immigration customs enforcement, which is ICE, and who detains you and takes you through the deportation proceedings to appear at a court and things of that nature, and sometimes being held at a corrections at a prison indefinitely, and then from there you just get deported. Like, it depends, right, on the cases, but with police collaborating with ICE and the history of that throughout the country, for undocumented folks, it's like you avoid them altogether if possible, even though they have not collaborated here. Just being associated with the police and their history of that is like, I'd rather be safe than sorry. So no, I don't want to be around that building or around that police presence. Perhaps a student might have some sort of protective status with their undocumented status, like DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, but their parents don't, or their partner doesn't. And so then you have that trauma from your family and loved ones that you carry, where you just avoid police altogether, right? And so then interacting with police at an institution where you're supposed to be at peace and gaining an education and growing, fostering those values to become a productive member of society per se, and you encounter police, and then your stomach turns and you just want to cry and you get frustrated, whatever the case may be, depressed, I would say no, having them on campus would be like not a good idea because of the history of them working with ICE. And yes, we have a police department on campus, and as long as I avoided them and just stuck to my studies or got around through the trails, walking around, I didn't have much of a problem. The other interaction that I did have with the police department was during the Wildcat strike, the grad student Wildcat strike a few years ago. And at that time, there were dozens of police officers at the strike, and that was intimidating. And the confrontation started getting more and more violent. And I know that folks would get arrested. And given my immigration status, getting detained or arrested, anything to have to do with the police and the university, it doesn't help me at all.
When I think of like police, when I think about campus, when I think about surveillance, I think about power. And I think about who has the power and who lacks the power and who enforces the laws that exerts this power. And at UCSC, we had, I think, an event back in 2019 or 2020 where the grad students were basically striking and demanding a better wages, just like recently we had a cola strike. And at that time, the main cop, I want to say, wasn't just the police you see in uniforms. It was the person in power who gave the orders to brutalize these students who were simply demanding food, better living conditions, and just overall better quality of education. When I think of all that situation, I think about a chancellor who's enabling these cops, who's ordering these cops, who is funding these cops, who prioritizes these cops because it protects her wealth. And when I think about cops on campus, that's all they do. They protect the wealth of the chancellor. They protect the wealth of the people that have money, because it's not protecting dark, brown people like me.
My thoughts on policing are mostly on how it permeates into all parts of our lives. So I think that the way that I think about policing personally are the ways that it's impacted my family relationships first. My father recently passed away in 2022, and he was incarcerated off and on throughout my life, but also I think about the ways that policing affected him before he was actually in the prison system. So the ways that he was in foster care, the ways that his mother was policed, and parenting was policed in his community, the way that he was tossed around in the foster care system, the way he was taken from loving homes and put into homes that were less stable, and the way that that impacted his life moving forward and ultimately impacted my life and our relationship together. And so before any sort of notion of the police state or even eventually coming to an abolitionist perspective, it was really this understanding that policing in Black communities and in the ways that policing affects Black families was my introduction to understanding what policing is. I've had a friend and neighbor who was having, her daughter was having a lot of mental difficulties, and the police responded to her house, and they verbally threatened her, saying that they've received a lot of calls and obviously it's a problem household, and saying very inappropriate things, not taking her call seriously, and telling her straight out telling her that they're recording her. There's been a lot of aggression from the campus police, where I think that the university administration, the way that they talk about campus police is that it's separate from city police or state police, who that the campus police are specifically trained to work with students and with the campus community. And what I've heard and witnessed myself is that that's not true.
So I think that we just have to sort of reimagine what safety looks like and reimagine what emergency response looks like. A lot of us have taken inspiration from the Cahoots program, which was pioneered in 2 communities in Oakland, which is a mobile crisis response service that is people who are trained as basically social workers who are first responders, right, in cases of mental health crisis, someone who maybe seems to be having like a diabetic episode, someone who is, living on the streets and, might be at risk of hypothermia. And they found that, this, reduces the need for police, right? So it's one kind of abolitionist step. It keeps everyone safer, and not that this should be sort of the criteria that we use when we're thinking about programs, but it also saved the city tons of money because a police force is also very, very expensive to maintain. And then I start to think kind of more broadly again about safety on a university campus, and what does safety look like? It means having access to adequate housing. It means having access to food. It means having access to counseling and psychological services. It means having healthcare. It means having community spaces. It means having professors who share things in common with you and understand your experiences. My experience of talking to my students, those are the ways that they define safety. So how do we shift our resources and our institutional capacity around to support safety in those ways? Those are the questions that I think we should be asking.
Policing, to me, in my lifetime, I've never seen as an ally, because it's never served me as an ally. It's always been an object of intimidation or of something that's not going to provide a level playing field. All of my interactions with police have been arbitrary. I've been stopped sometimes for speeding, but I've been stopped most often for doing nothing. Just one example, I was driving down with my daughter in Monterey County. We went down because there's some beautiful places down there, and we're off on a road where there's not very many other people. And a police passed me, and I told her, watch, he's going to come back and stop me. And sure enough, he did. And he asked my driver's license and all this other kind of stuff. And I asked him, well, why did you stop me? And he said, well, I just didn't know if you were someone that we had been looking for. And I said, what was the description of the person you were looking for? Were they driving a Jeep? Were they my height? And he couldn't say that. He said, well, we just have to be sure around here. And because a lot of things have been happening. And every time I've been stopped, it's been something like that. And when I see someone else stopped, sometimes I make sure I stop and make sure there's another presence there. And then if I do that, the police, in New York I did that, and the police came after me after they let the person go, which was the main thing I was going to do. And this, in the one case I'm thinking about, was a female, and they let her go. But then they came right after me, and the same story. Well, we were looking for someone that fit your description. I said, what's my description? What's my height? What's my weight? So that's why I've never had a real positive exchange with police. I know that they happen, but none's ever come to my aid at a time where I could have another impression. It's always something that's arbitrary like that, and not feeling like it's for my protection. And if that's going to be the case, if they're not going to be there to protect everyone, then they shouldn't be there. It has to be something that's not a threat to those that they're claiming to be protecting. And I haven't heard that that's the case. And so at this point, not based on something that's happened to me, but based on what I've observed, I would say that no, they're not a good presence on campus. And to earn that presence, they should have to prove that they're for the benefit of everybody on campus.